So today, the US Navy intercepted another fishing boat in international waters off the coast of South America, attacking the boat, bombing it, destroying it, and killing the occupants, whom we are assured were drug traffickers. Narco-terrorists is the word the Americans like to use now. And it made me think back to the war in Afghanistan, when President Obama would hold his weekly drone bomb target meetings. And we were told that he was blowing up suspected terrorists and sometimes their families. And it made me wonder, and it made me question, weren't we all always entitled to the presumption of innocence? I'm Bintang, and this is Friday News Review. So, welcome to the program for Friday the 24th of October. My, how the year flies. So, what exactly is the presumption of innocence, and why is it important? Do we really need it? It has uses, or its importance is twofold, really. What it does, on the one hand, is it cuts down on vexatious complaints. Now, we all know that people are apt to blame other people for things at the drop of a hat. You know, my neighbour came home drunk last night. I find a scratch in my car. I'm going to put two and two together, and I'm going to think straight away he scratched my car. When, of course, the scratch may have been there when I was in the parking lot earlier at the shopping centre, and so forth. So that's one issue. The other issue, and the more important one, and the real trick behind it, I guess you'd say, is it places the burden of proof on the accuser, not the accused. In other words, if you want to accuse your neighbour of scratching your car, you need to have evidence, you need to gather proof to show that you have reasonable cause to suspect that they've done something. Now, suspect is an interesting word, and we'll come back to that a lot. And it's not just important for working out simple neighbourhood disputes with your pisshead neighbour coming home late at night. Countries and governments and law courts around the world use it. It is globally enshrined in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The burden of proof, or the presumption of innocence, it actually can be traced back to about 13th century Roman law, and it is implied, though not stated, in documents such as the Magna Carta of 1215, which talks about due process. But it has actually been enshrined in the UN Declaration of Human Rights in that the presumption of innocence is always paramount in our law. In other words, we have to actually prove or have evidence to implicate someone or something of wrongdoing. And this is really important because, as I said in my intro, I remember listening to the news in Australia on our ABC channel talking about today a drone attack was organised against a group in Afghanistan, and 7 suspected terrorists were eliminated. I think it was the word they used. And I used to yell at the TV. It doesn't get you very far, I know. But I used to scream out, say, no, 7 suspected terrorists weren't eliminated today. 7 innocent human beings were murdered, because without the actual, evidence to back it up, we have to, under our law, in this rules-based society that we're always going on about, we have to presume that everyone is innocent until we can find evidence that they're guilty. Now, take, for example, the alleged drug runners that the US Navy keeps blowing up off the coast of South America. Now, the Colombian president has come out today and said that they actually killed a fishing boat, and they killed Colombian nationalists, fishermen who were out there fishing. This is the problem that the world has slipped into, and it's happened globally now, that we just accept that anyone suspected of anything, A, is automatically guilty, and B, can be killed. Now, even if you are guilty, don't we have law and order in this? As I said, I keep coming back to it, the rules-based order that the West keeps preaching about. Well, if somebody is suspected of being a drug runner, okay, as far as I know, the United States doesn't have a death penalty for drug running nationally. And in fact, as far as I know, I'll have to double check, but I think it's 37 states in America currently enforce or have capital punishment. The others don't. So how does the United States then justify a national program of capital punishment when it can't even agree with it domestically, let alone internationally? And how does the United States justify any form of due process when it targets people? Now, even, this is the point I'm making, even if these people are drug runners, what legal basis do we have to then just blow them up? Aren't we supposed to apprehend them and try them in a court of law? Is that not how the rules-based order is supposed to work? And yet we continually and flagrantly violate our own laws. And as I've said many times in this program, no wonder countries like North Korea, China, and Russia, they point their finger and laugh at us. We bang on about the rules-based orders. Number one, well, no one can show me these rules. No one's agreed to them. No one's written them down anywhere. But we break them and violate them in the most hypocritical way continually. The premise of the presumption of innocence is a key tenet of human rights. And it's important. And the fact that it's slipping, it's being allowed to slip and being allowed to be overridden and ignored, is changing the moral compass of society. And I say that because if you look at protests and the like even in Australia now, there's all these protests against immigration and people marching around with immigration. We've got to cut down all this rampant immigration. When in actual fact, immigration levels have fallen, not risen. So there is an example, and I know you might think it's a bit of a link, but this is the issue I have, and this is the concern I have, is that this gradual perceptual change into not requiring factual basis before you make accusations, a presumption of guilt over innocence, is slowly some form of osmosis spreading through the community. And so now you have people marching about things that they have no actual factual basis to support, just an assumption that, oh, you're guilty. And it's been used internationally. I mean, we've got now the International Criminal Court has issued a warrant. I mean, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here too, because they issued one on Netanyahu and his cohort of complete assholes. But the one I want to talk about is the one they issued against Vladimir Putin for apparently stealing children. Now, this whole claim, okay, like everything that comes out of that war, if you trace it back, and as I said before, the great Australian journalist, John Pilger, may he rest in peace, he spent a week tracing back every statement about the Ukraine war. And he said every single one came back to two words: Zelensky said. Now, this issue of the stolen children, 900 children, Zelensky said, Russia has stolen, actually, spirited away 900 children. And on the basis of that, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin. Once again, where was the presumption of innocence? Because Zelensky said it's true, it must be true. Well, the amount of lies and bullshit that's come out of that guy's mouth and continues to come out of that guy's mouth, he is the last person in the world I would trust right now. So the question begs, what was the basis for this? And the Russians immediately then responded by saying, give us a list, these 900 children you've got that have been stolen away by us, give us a list of names and we will cross-check it for you. Of course, what happened? Zelensky couldn't provide any names because he doesn't have any names. So there's an international incident where the International Criminal Court is acting without the presumption of innocence. Now, whether you like Putin or hate Putin, take the emotion out of it. This is always what happens. It clouds issues. And of course, then people go, oh yeah, but Putin, I'm told he's evil, he must be evil. Well, regardless, in this instance, the ICJ has forfeited his right to a presumption of innocence. So where do we stand from a moral standpoint on our rules-based order when our own courts are ignoring the very fundamental principles which they're entrusted to uphold. Now, people might turn around and say, oh, but Bintang, I don't think you got a problem with Netanyahu. But yeah, the United Nations came out with a documented report and clearly stated, after months and months, that what was happening in Gaza was ethnic cleansing and was genocide. That is the word they used. So you have a legal, factual basis from which to make a claim, which then, like anyone else, as much as I think Netanyahu is a floating turd and the most disgusting human on the planet, he still has a right to go to court and defend himself. But at least there's a factual basis for the charge. There has been no factual basis for the charge against Putin. But of course, we know the ICJ, like every other institution, like the Nobel Peace Committee, has now just become a political arm of the Western organisation, of Western powers, has nothing to do with what it is set out to do in the case of the ICJ, to implement international law under the Rome Statute, and in the case of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, to actually award the prize to someone who's interested in peace, not in having their own country invaded and hundreds of thousands of their own people killed. Although, considering that's what Zelensky is doing every day, and he seems to be feted as a hero, maybe that's the way forward. Anyway, we discussed that last week. Speaking of the war in Ukraine, by the way, it's interesting. The Europeans they've hit on a brilliant idea. I was listening to that 3D blonde joke, Kaja Kallas, saying that they've come up with this great idea that will crush the Russian economy and will bring the war to an end. They're going to sanction Russia. God, you know what? Why didn't we think of that before? Wait. Anyway, so there's a new sanctions package going on with Russia. As I've said repeatedly, you're not being told the truth about that war. The obstacle to peace is not Russia. It is not Vladimir Putin. It is Zelensky. Vladimir Zelensky, that's how you actually pronounce his name, we know he signed a law saying he would refuse to negotiate with Russia. Then he stuck stridently to his claim that peace will only be achieved by Ukraine returning to its 1991 borders. Now, we know that's just farcical. See, this is the problem when you've got one person trying to negotiate in reality and another one trying to negotiate in fantasy land. Zelensky blew it in 2022 when he was too afraid of Boris Johnson to accept a peace deal which would have kept all of Ukraine, barring Crimea, which was never part of Ukraine anyway. It would have kept Ukraine together. And all it would have demanded was that the Donbass oblasts had autonomy, but they would still be part of Ukraine. That was his chance to end the war on favourable terms and to maintain his country and to save a lot of lives, both Russian and Ukrainian. But of course, Boris Johnson, the walking toilet brush, went over there and intimidated the little dictator and told him what to do. And like the little puppet he is, he did it. He kept fighting. And the result has been catastrophic. And everyone blames Putin and the Russians and goes on about it without seeing the very simple basic fact that the war could have ended in 2022 and the person who didn't end it was Zelensky. So the person who is responsible for the disaster that Ukraine has become and will become in the future is Zelensky. Like it or not. Now, I know that view is not popular with a lot of people, but that's because a lot of people listen to BBC and CNN and read the Daily Telegraph. And as I've said, you will never learn anything by listening to mainstream media. You need to research yourself and look at factual events. Anyway, moving on, what's been happening in my neck of the woods in Australia, in my hometown? I hear Barnaby Joyce has decided to join the One Neuron Party, which I thought was wonderful. I think it's great. I mean, after all, you should flush all your shit down the one toilet, shouldn't you? So that's what's happening there. And as usual, the Australian government is still going on about the appalling AUKUS treaty, which essentially means we give all our cash, all our sovereignty, and all the control of our defence to America. A wonderful idea. I saw recently that Japan's new Prime Minister, I like to call her Miss America, because let's face it, that's all she is. That's what she represents. She's talked about having to strengthen Japan's military and to look at altering Japan's constitution, because at the end of the Second World War, we we decided to put a rein on those little bastards because of the horrors they had perpetrated on the world. And we forced them to have a pacifistic constitution. Now, of course, they're trying to change it. They've already changed the no aircraft carriers rule, and they're putting fighter planes on their helicopter carriers, which makes them aircraft carriers. They've bought F-35B fighter planes. And the Japanese Prime Minister said that what she's strengthening the country against is the Chinese threat. And I laughed. And he said, here we go again. Where's the presumption of innocence on this? How many times has China invaded Japan this century and last century? Ever. Oh, that would be none, Bintang. Okay? But how many times has Japan invaded China? Well, that would be in Manchuria, and then they brought in the entire Kwantung army, took over most of the country. And what did the Japanese do there? Well, let's see. What were their pastimes? I mean, I won't be facetious because it's beyond horrible. It's not funny at all. If you read about the rape of Nanking, I challenge you to do it without feeling physically ill. What those bastards, the Japanese army, did there. This was an army that used to grab babies from women, their children. Think of it, your child. Throw them in the air and catch them on the end of a bayonet for sport. They used to rape pregnant women, split open their stomachs and pull out the fetus. These are things they did. Now, you might be recoiling in horror listening to this. You fucking well should be. This is what the Japanese perpetrated on the Chinese people, lining them up for bayonet practice so their soldiers could practice on a live person, and the first person being told, bayonet this man, this woman, this human being, but don't kill him or her, because we want the other person to have a go and finish them off. This is disgusting. They used to shoot civilians so that the soldiers could get used to real bloodletting. I mean, it's a disgrace that recently similar stories have emerged from my own country and its special forces practicing a similar thing in Afghanistan, something which I'm eternally ashamed of. And the fact that we have the person who brought this to light, David McBride, in prison while the people who did it are free is another disgusting blight on Australia's record. Anyway, sorry, I digress. But I get angry about these things. I get angry about the lack of humanity. And I get angry when I hear the Japanese saying they have to worry about the Chinese threat. No, Japan. It is China that has to guard itself against the Japanese threat. It is China that does not want a repeat of history. It is China that wants a strong military to defend it so that the Japanese can't come and slaughter and butcher its people ever again. Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever put that into perspective as to how the Chinese might be feeling about Japan? And of course, here in the West, in our rules-based order, all of course we get is the propaganda about the Chinese threat. And as I've said many times, I don't recall China bombing Afghanistan. I don't recall China attacking Libya. I don't recall China funding a bunch of religious, fundamental, fanatic nutcases to commit genocide in Gaza. I don't remember China doing any of that. China is, compared to the West and compared to what we've done, China is one of the most benign countries on earth. And yet we freak out because somehow they're not allowed to have a big military. They're not allowed to be economically strong. Well, considering the track record of what our big militaries have done, I don't really perceive China as much of a threat. But once again, we come back to the presumption of innocence. Okay? Where is the evidence that China is a threat, that China is aggressive? And as I've just pointed out, the evidence is exactly the opposite. The evidence indicates that we, the Western powers, we're the threat, we're the colonial people, we're the ones who go and bomb other countries. So let's apply the presumption of innocence to China. Show me evidence where China is threatening other countries. And don't come back and say, oh, they hosed a Filipino patrol boat with a water cannon. Yeah, they're acting what I'll call belligerently in the South China Sea. Aggressively, a water cannon. We're looking at ourselves where we go and we bomb and we kill not just thousands, millions. And yet somehow we're the good guys, we're fine, but China is aggressive and needs to be contained. Comes back to, like I said, this social perception now that we've ingrained in people that the presumption of innocence is no longer important. And I say now more than ever, it is crucially important because people need to question. And when they are told, for example, China is a threat, well, their first instinct, rather than the programmed yes, 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 should be a presumption of innocence. Oh, hang on, tell me how. And if you can show that China is a threat, then I'm all for saying China is a threat. But maintain the presumption of innocence, please. Okay, that's pretty much it. Oh, just in closing, something that's been bugging me for a while, got to get off my chest. When electric vehicles first started, I think they're great, by the way. And I think, when the EVs first came out, you had all the naysayers. As Arnie would say, don't listen to the naysayers. But it was interesting, people talking about how EVs were no good and how, you couldn't get a charging station everywhere. They had limited range, whereas a petrol stations are everywhere. You don't need to worry about filling up. And I always brought people back to the same argument used when the internal combustion engine made its appearance too. Because when cars first appeared, you had to get this unusual fuel, called petrol or diesel that wasn't available everywhere. It was only available in specific parts. So why would you have a car? My horse can eat grass at the side of the road. There's grass everywhere. He's got unlimited range. That new fancy jalopy, you got all this problem with it. Of course, if we'd kept that mentality, the conservative dickheads, sorry, I keep using tautologies when I speak about conservatives, they would have us still riding around on horses, which on the one hand is not such a bad thing when you think about the pollution and damage the internal combustion engine's done and the vehicles we've put it into, like tanks and bombers. But progress moves forward and it takes time, and always new technology has teething problems. And one of the issues, of course, was that electric cars have a limited range, and of course now we're seeing that their charging times are going down. They're clearly the way of the future, and those arguments are going out of the window. And we now have EVs everywhere. As I said last week, now more than 50% of the vehicles in China are electric. And as I keep repeating, China is so far ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen, it's not funny. Now, one thing that I noticed when EVs came out, and I guess being a former driving assessor, or I was instructing people about road safety and roads, was it came to me straight away, it was that EVs are very quiet. Now, on the surface of it, that's a great thing. Nice and quiet, they don't make a lot of noise when they're driving past your house at night. The danger, of course, is for pedestrians, because one of the senses we use when we're crossing roads or near roads and highways is, of course, the auditory sense. We listen, we hear the sound of cars coming. And when you're about to cross the road, I've done it many times, walking up and I'm about to cross and I hear a car coming and I'll just stop and look. Okay? You don't have that warning with an EV. It was the same when I worked on the railways. They called electric trains the silent death because they could sneak up to you in a railway yard where people are walking around doing maintenance and so forth. You don't hear them coming. The same issue applies to EVs. So I'm going to put out a challenge to governments around the world and to EV car makers like you, Mr. Musk. Elon's a fan of Friday News Review. You might not know it, but he watches every episode. But companies like Tesla should have noise-making machines on their electric vehicles. Now, I'm not talking about something blaring out like, standing in front of a concert by The Who. What I'm saying is that they should have some kind of like humming sound, some kind of low-grade, just an auditory awareness to catch your attention so you don't turn and walk out. Same with electric bikes. They're really dangerous because they're so quiet. You could walk out in front of one of those, not see it coming and get hit. It is a really pressing safety issue and something governments should look at. And with current technology, I read an article just the other day on the basically self-drive. It's called self-drive supervised or something in Australia. They've just released it on Teslas, that the car can basically drive itself. With forward-looking cameras and all this other technology, we could have auditory devices that when they detect people near the road, actually increase the noise slightly to make sure that you're aware that there is a vehicle coming. It's a small but very important safety step and something I think we should look at. Anyway, that's my rant for this week. Bintang Bernie, wishing you all the best, hoping you have a good weekend, and reminding you always, watch for those two types of people and avoid them both.